was 1946. President Truman had just established the CIA and ordered the desegregation of the United States military. The first Chicago baseball game was broadcasted, the Cubs versus the Cardinals. The Cardinals went on that year to beat the Boston Red Sox and win the 1946 World Series to catch a prize of $3,700. In Galesburg, Illinois, a local businessman was doing something on a much smaller scale. After a long, tumultuous experience in his in-laws' family business, my grandfather, G. Louis Vitale, decided it was time to take a risk. Louis didn't have a lot of money. At the time he had 3 children, and his youngest son, Guy, wasn't even a year old. Louis decided it was time to take control of his family's future. With vigor for the beverage distribution industry, he decided to open up a distributorship on his own. Louis rented approximately 800 square feet in an old Buick garage in downtown Galesburg. With just 3 employees, Louis was in business. G&M Distributors Incorporated, the G for Guy, the M standing for Margot, Michael, and his daughter Marcia, was created. The company's first supplier was full of gusto. It was the Schlitz Brewing Company, the beer that made Milwaukee famous. A little extra head there. Things started off strong. Schlitz was the fastest growing beer in the country. Louis then added another strong beer to his portfolio, Falstaff. In 1949, Louis was introduced to a man named Bert Husing. The 2 men formed a strong relationship in 1950, and Louis agreed to bring a little known brand to the Galesburg area called Pepsi Cola. Along with Pepsi, there was Nesbitt's, eventually Team, and Mountain Dew, all bottled from Bert's facility in Rock Island, Illinois, and Louis brought them to Galesburg and the surrounding communities. Louis was able then, into G&M, to start a Pepsi Cola division. Things were going absolutely fantastic through the 1950s. Additional products were added to the company's portfolio. The company rapidly grew out of space at the 800 square feet it had rented, so it moved to a facility on South Chambers Street. The new space enabled the company to continue to grow. And as product lines were added, the space again became too small. G&M then moved to South Kellogg Street. This was a very strategic move for G&M at the time. The company could now be serviced by rail. The new location again allowed the company to grow, and Louis, along with his general manager, Quentin Sharp, sought new product lines, and Louis also at this time founded Vitale Incorporated based in Aurora, Illinois. The late 1950s, Louis was appointed the rights to the Hiram Walker Distillery. This created a new business segment for G&M Distributors, hard liquor. Then in the 1960s, Louis convinced Ernest Gallo to bring Gallo wines to the Galesburg area and to Aurora, Illinois. This began yet another new product line for Louis. He now had Pepsi, Gallo wine, Hiram Walker, and all of the beers. The company had 2 distinct divisions now, the Pepsi division and the alcohol division. Things were going good, and at this point, Louis expanded his business and acquired 2 Pepsi bottling companies, Decatur Bottling and Terre Haute Bottling Company. His son Mike ran both of these companies. He also financed a distributorship in Madison, Wisconsin. Throughout all of the expansion, Louis stayed true to Galesburg, his adopted home. Then in 1973, my father, Guy L. Vitale, made the decision to move home to Galesburg. Guy had spent time in Washington, in Ecuador, in the Peace Corps, and then graduate school in Missouri. Upon returning to Galesburg, Guy worked with Quentin Sharp for about 6 months, and then Quentin retired. Guy realized the company was rapidly running out of space on South Kellogg Street. He convinced Louis that it was time to relocate, which was no small feat. G&M was then moved to its present location at Linwood Road in the late 1970s. While working with a sales rep one day, Guy heard a rumor on the streets of Galesburg. That rumor was that the Anheuser-Busch franchise for the Galesburg and Kewanee areas were for sale. He inquired and found the rumor to be true. Then, in 1979, the rights to Anheuser-Busch were purchased, and a 3rd division of G&M Distributors was created. The 3rd division was added to the company, and things were going absolutely great. The company now had a division led by Pepsi, Anheuser-Busch, and the workhorse of the company, the Schlitz division that also contained Gallo, Hiram Walker, and various other liquor brands and wine companies. The company continued to grow and dominate the market as brands were added throughout the upcoming years. In the 1980s and 90s, brands such as Jim Beam, the Behringer Winery, and Robert Mondavi Winery were added to the company. Guy's drive never stopped. The Anheuser-Busch division grew, Pepsi grew, Gallo grew its territory with G&M and over doubled its volume. That brings us up to 2005. I happened to be back in Galesburg for a week over the summer, and Guy called me into his office. He said, "Close the door." I was convinced I had done something wrong, I was in trouble, something was going on. He asked me what my future plans were. At the time, I was living in Washington, D.C., working for a mega distributor, and I was just starting to learn the beverage business. He asked me to come back to Galesburg, but said there was no pressure. I thought about it, and I thought about it. And then I decided that I needed to first go back to school. So I told Guy, I said, I want to make sure I'm 100% sure with this decision, and we agreed we'd talk about it again in about a year. I enrolled in graduate school and moved to Southern California. In the fall of 2007, I boarded a plane to Arizona for one of the best trips of my life.